I think that more people are going to be more aware and are going to want some amount of control in privacy. Not necessarily that, they don't want to give away their information. They just want to know, what are you doing with my information and am I okay with that?
So the first question is, in the realm of user experience design, how do you define and measure trust? Are there particular metrics or user feedback mechanism that you find most valuable in assessing the success of trust building elements?
You could go about measuring it in a few different ways, and I think that's probably a good strategy. You shouldn't trust just one metric and believe that this one metric means, if we have, let's say you want to measure trust based on retention, so you can count your daily active users or how many your entire user base that's active. And as long as that number, doesn't decrease over time or stays the same or grows, then you're maintaining trust. But I wouldn't trust just that metric, because you still don't know exactly what, even though people are keeping with using your product, it doesn't necessarily equate to them trusting your product. So that's one good metric for probably tracking trust, but you may want to incorporate other methods. So, for example, maybe if you have a quantitative method like daily active users, or some metric that you're tracking maybe in Google Analytics on how people are using your application or how frequently, you can also pair that with maybe a more qualitative type of measurement. So something like, if you're frequently interviewing or having touch points with users in some way, using some sort of, Likert scale questions or something like that, that can measure how much users trust your product. And you can kind of get at that with questions like how the user basically feels when they're using the product, and how they feel about your brand as well. And if that's coming out positive as well from those touch points, and combined with the quantitative, then you can kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together and say, yeah, I think we have a great user trust in our product. Or maybe they don't match up, and then, okay, people are still using our product, but the qualitative side says they're using it, but they don't necessarily trust it. They just have to use it. Maybe there's not an alternative competitor that fits their needs. You can still increase trust. So how can you keep the retention, but also make them love your product, in the qualitative side of things as well? So I hope that answered that.
Yeah, it's a good answer. It's a mix of things. Okay.
I think doing a mix of measurements is always a good idea.
And can you share a specific project where you successfully implemented or designed elements to enhance user trust?
Well, I would say, so one other strategy for user trust would be owning up to and fixing mistakes. So I think it's in design, in software at least, there's always going to be mistakes made. A bug is going to be released, or some user data is going to not be applied properly, or even the user might make a mistake but perceive it as the product being making a mistake, because of maybe the communication isn't really good on the product side, and so the user makes a mistake that's detrimental, like they delete data or they lose some progress in whatever they're doing. So when a mistake happens, I think a great way to create user trust is to take advantage of that situation and not only fix the mistake, but I would say, like, fix it times 100. So both fix the mistake as quickly as possible while in communication with the users, and then also, if there's anything on top of that that you can do to make that situation even better, like if you were working on, well, let me see the example I was going to say, which is, so on the current project I'm working on, our user base is people within the Air Force, and they use our application for tracking strategic goals within a calendar year. And so there's been an occasion where we released a new feature that allowed them to copy data into a new calendar year. But what happened was, some of those permissions didn't get copied over. So it wasn't like a major mistake, because they still were able to copy the data, but then users were getting confused because they were saying that they didn't have access, and what they actually was happening was they were copying over some of the content but not copying over the access permissions. So when a few users reached out, what we ended up doing was not only just fixing that bug so that in the future when you copy over the data, it copies over the permissions, but we retroactively went back and figured out who should have these permissions and who doesn't, and we remedied that as quickly as possible. So we actually did that first. We fixed the problem for the users who were having a mistake, and then we fixed the bug so that it would copy over the permissions. And that way we could very quickly, within the span of the same day, we could get back to those users and say, hey, we're sorry this happened, your permissions, you should have access now. And then we also applied some transparency and kind of said this was what was happening. You correctly copied it over, but on our end we weren't copying this over. We fixed that now, it should work just fine, please reach out again if you have more difficulties. So in that scenario, we got a lot of good feedback from people because they were very appreciative that not only that we responded really quickly and we were able to like reverse the problem as quick as possible, but we also explained what happened and then ensured them that it wasn't going to happen again. So, yeah, I think that in general, the user base for this particular project, we have a really good relationship with them and we try to meet with users as often as possible. And we can tell that our user base really do trust us and our product because they feel like they have a voice in what happens and that we're very responsive to them.
And do you have an example where maybe you need to conduct a user research or maybe some interview or something that the user feedback influence in design decisions to make it more trustworthy?
I guess so. This is kind of similar, but this was actually very early in the same project. But in general, I would say that we were able to build a lot of trust prior to building the product because we did do user interviews and we tested a lot of the features before even getting into development. So we had this feature where users could basically create these notes for they could attach these notes to these reports, and they could like throughout like a month create like a bunch of small notes, and then during like at the end of the month when they wanted to present information, they could pick through those notes to be able to apply some of those to the report. That way it wasn't everything, but they could pick a few. So within this feature, when we were first designing it, we met with users and we were asking questions about how they wanted to use it and what type of things do they put in reports. Basically, we ended up building an archive feature. And so the way we got to the archive feature was because users basically wanted to be able to have the notes and like keep a log of the notes without losing them and having to delete them when they wanted to put them on the report. And we went back and added some more depth to the feature based on feedback on what people wanted to feel like they weren't losing things that they had written, even if they were never going to go back and read it again. They felt better knowing that, well, I wrote that and I might not use it again, but I want to know that it's still there. And that's why we built this archiving feature so that you could tuck away these notes that you had written previously that you don't really need anymore, but you don't want to delete them. And so that's how we came to that feature, was just basically to instill some trust. And I think that kind of has a little bit to do with the feeling. A lot of our users have this comment, like we've noticed this common theme a lot in our application, which is users are really afraid of losing their data. And so we've kind of implemented that strategy a few different times, but that originally started when we were interviewing about this one feature. And so we've done things like, we've implemented archiving features and ways to like recover data and things like that.
That sounds interesting because even if they don't use it, they feel like safe. They know.
Yeah, that's a common thing.
Okay, and security and privacy are crucial aspects of user trust. Well, how do you integrate these considerations in design process?
It's part of everything, so you should definitely always consider the privacy aspect of what you're building and what the expectations are when you're making it. So The way that I do that is before in the research phase, asking those questions up front early on and challenging your assumptions on what you think users are going to accept as their baseline for privacy. And this is going to change based on your audience. Some audience might be more open to sharing a lot of information because they want for example, what's really popular is like very customized experiences, things that say your name and say like, hey Sydney, here's your dashboard. But in order to do that, you have to collect a lot of information from users. And sometimes there's a line where it's not appropriate for that particular product, or your user base is not going to be comfortable with giving too much information. So I think it's just something that you need to, when you're originally creating personas and doing research, try to pin down exactly what your user base is going to be comfortable with. And I would lean on being more private as opposed to being more aggressive with collecting data, even though data can be really useful for understanding how your users are using your product. Once you break that trust in terms of privacy, it's very hard to roll that back. It's very hard to say, I mean, we've seen things on the news where a big product will do something that's untrustworthy, and it's very hard to fix your image after you've already created a perception that you're collecting data that you shouldn't be collecting, or you're doing something that the user didn't know about. So yeah, I would err on the side of doing the research up front before you make those decisions, and also trying to deeply understand how far you can take collection of data and privacy and stuff like that.
Mm. And now for the last question, you actually mentioned it a little bit in this answer, but can you share some recent insights or trends that you believe will play a significant role in the future of UX design, in obviously with trust in mind?
Yes, I personally value privacy and security. I come from like a technical background, and so kind of seeing those things in the background, what happens with that information, it kind of changes my bias. But I do think that the trend in the past has been technology and these products you use are very black box. And so people were willing to give in a lot of personal information, and they were and the products were able to give a very custom experience, which is great because then you get products that do anticipate your next move before you do it. Like Netflix is, it tells you what you're going to like to watch before you even know that you want to watch it, because it just knows you so well. And that feels good when the product knows you really well. But at the same time, I think moving forward with some of the events that have happened in the last few years with data privacy and security, I think that more people are going to be more aware and are going to want some amount of control in privacy. And we've already seen this being put in place by like like Apple, for example. They've been really pushing the privacy stance, and they've been marketing the privacy stance. And the reason they're marketing it is because they know that there's a user base, that the user base for people who care about, not necessarily that, they don't want to give away their information. They just want to know, what are you doing with my information, and am I okay with that? And if you communicate that and say, yeah, we're using this amount of information, we don't collect this, we do collect that, and this is how we use it, we're using it in these ways, and none of these ways are things that you should be, as long as it's things you agree to and you're aware of, then you feel like you trust that product. So I think that more brands are going to be kind of following like Apple's footsteps and trying to relay this appearance of having privacy and security. So I think that's going to be a growing trend. But I think what's interesting about that trend is it's kind of in conflict with, like, we're all very used to super customized experiences. We're used to picking up our phone and saying like cafes near me, and your phone already knows where you are and a lot of other contextual information, and it can recommend you something. But if you want more privacy, then you have to it's kind of like, in order to get a custom experience, you have to give away information. And so I think people are going to have to come to
A decision.
Yeah, a decision. Do I want a very custom experience, but I'm gonna have to, like, give up a bunch of information? Or am I going to not give away that information, but now I kind of have a more tedious experience because I have to, like, manually supply information specifically. It doesn't automatically know information about me. So I think somewhere people are gonna end up somewhere in the middle, but I think people, for the most part, there's gonna be more trends in transparency in what people are doing with your information, and I think also more tools that help you control that as well. So more products that help you control how much of your information is getting out and what you wanna do with it, or just security in general. We've also seen a lot of security things coming out, so there's been a big push for two-factor authentication and multiple forms of authentication, and this is just because we haven't had a very, people aren't very secure usually with their passwords and stuff, and so a lot of products are trying to find ways to become more secure, but not always the best ways, but
Oh, that's so interesting, this topic, because I'm thinking, for example, Netflix, maybe it's the thing right now is if I want to watch Netflix, I need to accept all of these terms and conditions.
Yes.
Maybe it should be like in the middle, like maybe I don't want you to have this, and this, and I don't care that I have to choose my own movie, but I want to have
Mhm.
access to Netflix. So right now it's like you or you agree and you have access, or you don't and you don't have access, you
Mhm.
know? So it
Exactly.
would be like more, I don't know, like you say, transparency
Mhm.
and come in the middle with the user.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what people want. I think people wanna be able to say kind of pick what, pick your own adventure. They wanna be able to say, "Yes, I do want this. No, I don't. I don't care about this, so I'm gonna uncheck the box for that part of the experience," and so I think doing more of that. You have to be careful because sometimes if you supply too much choice, it can just get confusing, but the parts that you can anticipate that people want to make a choice in, I think that's a great always it's always good to give people choice.
Yeah. And definitely will build so much trust.
Yes, it definitely builds trust. I think so. Even if you have a user who always selects yes on everything, just giving them the option to say no makes them feel like they're
Oh, thank
empowered,
you.
you know?
Yeah. I'm gonna put yes anyway, but thanks for asking. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for asking. You go ahead, but, I'm glad that you asked.
Yeah.